In recent years, systemic practitioners have challenged the view that we are who we are because of individual or internal factors. They talk about the idea that our sense of identity, our notion of self, of who we are, is socially constructed. This means that the context we are in will have an effect on how we define ourselves and how we perceive others. Several systemic psychotherapists have been more interested in how interactions between people can contribute to the way we may perceive ourselves and others. They have created positioning theory. In our lives, we take positions in relation to others, and the positions we may take will define what we may say, how we may feel, and what we may do. Depending on the positions we take in our everyday social interactions, we continuously attribute cause to other people's behaviors. We give them intentions. This DVD is about a few applications of positioning theory to systemic practice. Dr. David Campbell is an eminent clinical psychologist and systemic psychotherapist who works at the Tavistock Clinic in London. In recent years, he has been interested in how positioning theory and family therapy can come together. He has widely contributed to applying positioning theory to systemic practice. We asked him to give us a definition of positioning theory. To do so, he first explains the notion of discourse.
To define positioning theory, you probably need to start with a good definition of discourse and discourse theory. So if we assume that social groupings, families, organizations, societies create discourses in which they communicate the things that give meaning to that group and to the way they interpret the world. Every family, every society has discourses. So we have a discourse about child protection, for example. And the discourse that we have about child protection is different in the UK than it would be in other countries. We put different amounts of money into it, we have different values about it, we have different trainings and so on. So that creates a discourse. Now, within any discourse, there are positions that are available to you to take. Society offers you positions that you can take in order to be a self, to be a person, to be a subject. They're called subject positions. So if I want to contribute to a discourse about child protection, I have to look around and say, well, what are the ideas and what are the possibilities for me to contribute to this? And then I can say, I do believe in this, I do not believe in that, and I've taken a subject position within a discourse that's available. Then positioning theory is an explanation of the things that influence us to take certain positions, and that we, for example, are part of a process in which we're positioned by other people, so we're influenced by others within a certain discourse to say certain things and to see certain things. And when we take a position, we also influence others. So it's a reciprocal process, and the positioning theory is trying to look at what it is, like what is the moral obligation that is implied when we take a position. What are we trying to do with other people? How are we trying to influence them? How are we influenced by others? What kind of rhetoric do we use? What kind of language becomes involved in our positioning? So it's a big field, but I find that it's a little bit too broad for me, so I want to find a way that I can use it clinically in a more narrow setting. That's why I've developed this model of looking at the polarity lines and seeing how people influence each other by positioning other people.
We can therefore position ourselves or be positioned by others. We can take many positions, but we are also influenced by our context, which may make us take a certain position. Our positions can change, and like the gymnast, some positions can be difficult to hold. Taking a position also influences our beliefs and our perception of the world. The same person, object, or event may take a different meaning depending on our position. The same person can be given different attributes or intention depending on the context. Different perspectives may change the way we see something. Our position may give the object a different shade or color and provoke a range of thoughts and emotions. Problems occur when people get stuck into their positions. David Campbell explains how he has come to use positioning theory in his clinical work and how this is useful to systemic practice.
What's influenced me to use this model as a family therapist is that as I get older and more experienced in the field, I'm more and more interested in reducing the therapy process down to its basic elements, down to what really matters. And the thing that becomes more and more important to me is helping people to listen to each other. And I think if you were going to reduce any family therapy down to its most basic process, I would say if you can really enable people to listen and take on board what other people are saying from other positions, that's it. That's all you have to do. The second advantage that I see in using the positioning theory is that it neutralizes the family members and people who feel very strongly about things, or people who have a lot of status in the family, or people that are really het up with lots of anger and emotion and a lot of power behind what they say. You can use positioning theory to neutralize that and to say, yes, that's one position, but there are 5 of you in the room, and we're interested in the 5 positions that can be articulated in this family. And a third advantage of using the positioning model is that it helps people to see how they're connected. So it's very systemic in the sense that you are talking about one person positioning another, and it also has the possibility to make a very powerful visual impact, because I use a lot of flip charts and diagrams in which I'll make a line and put positions down on the line that different people have taken. And I think it has a very powerful impact when you see that in a way that you can't have when you're just talking about it. So it does, it opens things up for people to begin to see their relationships in a more connected way, and also a way that's safe and respectful for them.
Positioning theory therefore helps families to explore their beliefs and action in relation to others. The following clinical example is an illustration of how a positioning technique called semantic polarities, can help the therapeutic process. This role play is about a couple consulting a family therapist as they are experiencing difficulties with their young daughter. The couple is having a conversation about when their daughter is not listening to them. The therapist invites them to think about their relationship to their daughter and introduces a polarity line between strict and not strict. The conversation will allow the emergence of themes that were not explored before in therapy.
Well, the only time she messed up with me is when she goes into one of her moods. She has, these mood things, and but most of the time she does as I say.
Okay. So if you can just bear with me for a minute on this, and on this line I'm going to put at this end extremely strict and at the other end not strict. And where do you think you are on this line today? Where would you position yourself?
Well, it's very different for me because it depends how I feel, at the time. Because I have mood swings as well, you see.
Okay, then I understand that things might change according to the way you feel. But let's take today. Where would it be today?
Well, today I think I would be in the middle.
Okay. How about here?
Yeah.
Okay. And Elena, where would you put yourself on this line today?
I'd probably put it a bit further up here, more like there,
Okay.
sort of halfway between.
So nearer strict.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Elena, you put yourself nearer strict today, and Jimmy has put himself further towards not so strict. So what do you think about that? What do you make of that?
Well, I think I'm generally more strict with Kima than Jimmy, because she doesn't behave the same way with me as she does with him.
Jimmy, why have you put yourself here today?
Well, I feel quite, stressed today. And on a day like that, I think I'll let her get away with more than I would usually do.
Okay, and then on a day when it hasn't been so stressful?
I'll be probably nearer to there.
To here. Okay. And what would be different about your behaviour if you were nearer to this end?
Well, if I was feeling okay, she wouldn't talk back to me like that.
So what would you be doing that would put you nearer this end?
Well, if, she was like talking back to me, I would probably, put her in her room. She wouldn't be allowed to, come out. I would say, that's it. And not let her sort of just get away with it. But you see, normally if I do that, she would calm down very quickly and then not make any more fuss. But and then she apologizes. So it's about I would be much more firmer.
Okay, so I'm going to put some firmness down here.
But today, because I'm not feeling 100%, like, she wanted ice cream and I just got it for her. But if I'm feeling okay, I'm much more strict with her. I would be much more there.
So I was just wondering what you meant by not being 100%.
Well, I have this high blood pressure problem. And then, sometimes I'm just not feeling, feeling very low. I'm just like picking her from school. And then, I feel just really tired and we get home and I just, crash. Just, sit on the settee, fall asleep, and she watches TV, whatever she wants.
So I'm thinking on a day like this, it's much more about Kima looking after herself?
Yes. Yes.
So Elena, what do you think about what you've heard?
I found it very interesting. I've never really thought about it before. There are times I come round and he's lying on the settee, and I know he's sometimes not 100%, but I never realised how it affected him when he's not 100%. Kima would be asking, can I eat that, can I do that, and he would just sort of let her do what she wants, and I never realised it's because he wasn't feeling 100%. It's interesting because it is as if she's in charge of the situation when he's not 100%.
Then would you be able to say if he was in a position when he wasn't 100%?
Well, only if I saw him.
So who would know that Jimmy was feeling low? Is that the right word to use, low?
Yes. I feel tired, feel run down, no energy, don't feel doing anything. I suffered from depression in the past, and I made a comeback, but I think I've never fully recovered.
And did you know about his depression?
Well, not really. I mean, I knew a little bit about it.
What do you know?
Well, not much really. I mean, we sometimes try to talk about it, but he doesn't really want to. I mean, I really can have him on the phone and can feel he's not 100%, but he would never say anything about it. I mean, if I actually see him, I can tell that he's not okay. But if I just ask, are you okay? He'll say, I'm all right, I just need to get through the day. So it's very hard to get him to talk about it.
And how do you think it would be for you if Jimmy was closer to this end?
Well, I think I wouldn't always need to be so strict with Kima, because it wouldn't have to always be me the one who was punishing her.
We see in this clinical example how the semantic polarity technique helped these parents to talk about the father's depression and low mood in relation to how they parent their daughter. Positioning theory can also help to understand and work with the complex network around families. Yvonne Ayo is a systemic psychotherapist who is working with families in schools. As a mental health professional based in education, she is often involved in multi-agency work. She explains how positioning theory has been very helpful to her clinical practice.
I have found positioning theory extremely useful in my work as a systemic psychotherapist working in secondary schools doing multi-agency work. And a good example of this is Anna, aged 13, who the school were concerned with about her poor school attendance. And when she was at school, she was extremely disruptive. She was avoiding going into classes. She was causing staff quite a lot of work in trying to find her, encouraging her to get into class and to actually do some learning. What I knew about the family was that there had been parental separation a few years before, and the mother had never quite recovered from the separation. The father had gone into another relationship, and as a result, the mother and father had lots of conflict between them around Anna's care and her contact with her father, and this was impacting on the mother's functioning and her ability to be able to encourage Anna to attend school. So when the referral came, it was to our service, it was to improve her attendance and also to improve the family context and the family relationships. Now, in the multi-agency meeting, we had the following professionals who were involved. We had the educational welfare officer, whose job it is to think about and work with families around attendance, and he has the statutory right to pursue court proceedings if children don't attend school after a certain amount of time. We had the head of year, who had main concerns about behaviour and learning of Anna. We had the inclusion manager, who is the person who is responsible for all the support people in the school, like the learning mentors, homeschool liaison people, in-class support service. So she was involved. We also had the inclusion worker from the local authority, and their task is to work with schools and with families who are on the brink of exclusion to try to keep them in school with various strategies and support programs. And we also had a social worker. The social worker was involved because there were concerns about Anna being out of school and being on the streets and being vulnerable to exploitation of gangs and groups in her neighbourhood. And then there was myself. And what was interesting in the meetings, I think, was that the social worker and the inclusion worker both felt very strongly, along with myself, that some support needed to happen as soon as possible for this family. And what I found was that the educational welfare officer was the least interested in doing any work with this family. And that had been based on his previous experience with the family. He knew older brothers who had gone through this education system, sort of, and then landed in prison for drug crimes. So he was of the view that there was nothing that could be done to support this family. Whereas the inclusion worker support and social worker were both of the view that if they worked intensively with the family, something might be possible. And in the middle of these two positions was the head of year and the inclusion manager. Now, slightly allied to the positions of the social worker and the inclusion worker was myself, where I felt that they could do a piece of work, and if they, depending on how far they got or the outcome of the work, then I would become more directly involved. So those are the kind of positions that we found ourselves taking up. I think what was useful about thinking about position theory in this case is that it allowed me to think of each person in their own position, in their own role, and in their own agency. And it allowed a piece of work to happen and to allow other people to not necessarily become too involved, but to actually retain their own position within the particular conversation. And I think by doing that, I think it helped move things forward rather than us get into polarised talk or persuasive talk around how we should all be involved. I think it allowed certain bits of the work to be able to be done by the different professionals.
As Yvonne Ayo demonstrates, the applications of positioning theory are multiple. Then how can we use it with wider networks, such as organizations? So far, we have heard how positioning theory is helpful when working with families within multi-agency context. These ideas have also been applied to the understanding of organizations and have inspired organizational consultants in their work with teams and organizational change. David Campbell explains why positioning theory can be used when working with organizations.
When I think about applying positioning theory to work with organizations, it takes on a different slant because although organizations are by definition systems, and in the purest sense they're more systemic than families are, they have to cohere together as a system in order to produce something, in order to provide a service or make a profit or whatever. Organizations don't want to spend their time sitting and talking about themselves in a reflective way about dynamics and feelings that they've got about the organization. They tend to be keen to get going and get to work and do what they have to do and do what they're getting paid to do. So I think that the positioning model is very good, very effective for organizations because it's not presenting a psychological model in an explicit way, and it doesn't put in the forefront that they have to share their innermost feelings. If they don't want to do that, that's fine. The other thing I think that appeals to organizations is that when you use diagrams and charts, they can see in a very schematic way how they're connected. So you've got this department that relates to that department, and this manager who supervises this worker, and so on. So they can see positioning very quickly, and they can see that there is an influence that they mutually have. And yet it's usually something that's, they haven't thought about. It's something that they haven't, it's not part of their daily currency of, thinking about all of these relationships. So I think it's very helpful for them.
Marianne Gronbaek is an organizational consultant who works in Denmark. She has found positioning theory and the use of semantic polarities helpful for many reasons.
The ideas are very useful to my work because I think I worship the thinking of creating conversations. And semantic polarities are the secure of having a conversation in a way that we respect all positions. The way I use it is that as a consultant, I know that I can present a polarity line and create this semantic polarity, and people will at once go into the not talking in theory, but talking in positions. And here we have all the changes. So I think it sets me free as a consultant because people are going into these ideas and they say, well, it's very difficult to learn how to do it. But once they are doing it, they're just playing.
Positioning theory seems to offer a range of ideas and techniques that are helpful to both systemic psychotherapists working with families in complex environments and systemic consultants who try to promote dialogue within organizations. But what is the future of positioning theory in systemic practice?
I see the future of positioning theory as a basic theory, because I think if you use it, you can use a lot of other models, and models, different ways of thinking, different theories and so on, different trainings to what people have been through, can be connected in this conversation using semantic polarities. So I think it's something that is hard to understand in a way that it's so simple. You just can't believe it's so simple. But once you get into it and see how simple it is, it's so easy to use as well. And I think the future will bring a lot of conversations where people are using it. They may not be expressing themselves that now we are taking a position in semantic polarity, but I think the awareness of when you first learn about it, and then from that on, gives you a certain concern about the positioning you are doing and the positioning you are giving to people. And I think that will have a good impact on our conversations.
When I think about the future of positioning theory, I have to admit I do feel a little bit evangelical about it, because I think it is such a simple and accessible tool for therapists to use, and it's so accessible for families and organizations to understand that I think more people ought to know about it and get excited about it and use it, because I find it is unusually freeing for the reasons I mentioned earlier. It's respectful, it neutralizes, people can see connectedness, but they also see difference, and they can value difference, and it has a lot of potential for being exploited in different ways. You can take different aspects of it and stress one aspect over another depending on the particular family you're working with. So I hope that it's something that people will feel is a tool that they can use in their kit of family therapy techniques, along with interviewing and along with things like structural techniques of intensifying and things like setting homework tasks and odd day, even day interventions and so on. I think it ought to be something that is a very prominent part of everybody's kit bag. I think that people should see positioning theory as a very loose structure. It's just a couple of simple ideas, and they should not feel that it has to be bound to a particular interpretation or a particular person or a particular school. But there just are some very simple ideas. They're very systemic. I think that they're very approachable. They're very, very sensible to people when you use them, and that people ought to take these on board and play with them and use them in any way that they like, because they are very freeing and they're very non-judgmental. They're very respectful. So I hope that people will take them on in that vein rather than feeling that it's a particular technique that has to be done in a particular way. If you say to people, yes, you take that position, you believe this about this child or this family, that's fine, I want to hear it, I want to respect it, but look at this continuum. There are many, many, many possibilities, and that has a very subversive effect on the position that people have taken, because they look around and they say, oh yeah, if I've taken that position, it's also possible to take another one. And that's, I think, part of the visual power of this, that they can see that these positions are available. And then it makes it possible for people to move off of the polarized positions.